Great to have everybody here. Hey, ninjas, what's up? It's good to see everybody here in the chat. Coming into the webinar is a special one for you guys. This is a members-only training session with Will Wang from Growth Labs. Hey, Will, how you doing?
Good, thanks. Hey, everyone. Awesome to have you all on here. Omar, thanks for having me on, mate.
Awesome. Will is a good friend. We've become fast friends in 2022. I've known of him and known about him. We've gone to meetups for years. But I finally told myself, I gotta get to know this guy a little bit better. So I that was my mission in 2022, and I think we've really become good friends. And I love what he does with his agency. He deals with really big accounts and big types of marketers and businesses. But he was generous enough to kind of say, hey, I'm happy to show what I do to help them out to your audience, and they can take it and run with it. So that's awesome of Will to come be here. In the chat, guys, just a couple of reminders. Introduce yourself as you join, and make sure you let us know what's your biggest challenge right now when it comes to your webinar funnel, because Will can make note of it, mental notes of it, so that he can incorporate it in his workshop today. I got Caroline saying, my challenge is finding people to attend my webinar. Attendance seems like a big one here. Dr. Joel is in the house saying, I'm excited for this, and I was advised to highlight a module from my course in my funnel, naming it. Okay, naming the actual course. Matt says, good morning to all from Melbourne. Great to have you here. Definitely keen for this one. Awesome, Matt. Great to have you here. Richard as well. Biggest challenge, getting an audience. We also have Pablo from New York. Whereabouts in New York, Pablo? I'm a native New Yorker myself. I lived in the Village for a bit. I actually lived right above the Comedy Cellar, right above actually Mamoon's Falafel, which is next to the Comedy Cellar. But that was my stomping ground on McDougal Ave. Great to have you here, Nicole from Melbourne. I'm looking for the next steps after the webinar. Great, definitely follow up. I can definitely help with that as well. John Denton from Perth, great to have you here, as well as Catherine from the Philippines. We got a lot of team members from the Philippines. It's great to have another person who's living there. My challenge is starting one and getting the leads. Love it. Libby's biggest challenge is knowing how many emails to put in the funnel and the best copy to use. Okay, so and Matt's biggest challenge, converting people to register from the registration page. Huge stuff here. This is good stuff, guys. And thank you guys for being here. We do these workshops. We bring on these experts for you to continue to give value to you guys. We know that we might have a great tool with Webinar Ninja, but the best utilize the tool is also part of what you sign up for. So we want to make sure that we give you that support. So I'm going to stop talking now. Will Wang is going to take over now from Growth Labs. Go ahead, Will. I'm going to let you take over, and I'll be here to support you along the way.
Awesome. Thanks, Omar. And everyone, thank you so much for the questions. I do like these kind of workshops that I run to be interactive. So please throw any questions into the chat. And as we go along, if I don't get to it right now, I will come back. And hopefully I've got some time left and I can come back and bounce questions around and go through answers. And I know copy is a big theme because copy obviously drives a lot of people through. So I will spend some time on that, but I have a feeling there's going to be way more copy questions after as well. So please go through and let me know what your questions are. So I'm going
to jump in here, Will, sorry. Guys, don't forget, you guys know this, you're ninjas, but there's a questions tab. So you can just pop your questions in the questions tab. That way it's easy for us to find. And then you can also upvote questions as you're going along. If you see a question that you want answered first, we'll go in the order of upvotes. So go ahead and pop them in the questions area by the chat tab. So just pop them in there. Thanks, Will.
Perfect. Awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit share screen because I want to take you all through some, for some info. I'm going to give you some examples, some templates. I'm going to give you some principles, some thinking around how to get people into a webinar. So I'm going to hit share screen and let me know if once that comes through and you can all see my screen here.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So the topic of what I'm going to be sharing today is obviously how to build a high converting webinar funnel or how to fill a webinar. I'm not going to be talking so much about how to run the webinar itself. So Omar, the way that you teach people how to run webinars, I'm absolutely a massive fan. In fact, one of the ways that we've adapted in the stuff that we do for clients is actually based on how you structure and run webinars. So I'm not going to be covering that so much today. It's more about getting people in. What do we do afterwards? Like, how do we actually get a webinar to convert and make us a bunch of money? So looking at building multi-million-dollar webinar funnels, I'm going to go through step by step and kind of share, what we do when we get a client come through and go, hey, we want to run a webinar. Can you build us a funnel? Can you build us some ads to get people in? So I'll take you through how we think about it, what we do with planning, building, and also improving funnels. And I'm also going to share with you some numbers and give you a range of numbers to kind of aim for. Numbers that we're seeing with the campaigns we're running, numbers we're seeing for ourselves and for some of my friends who run successful businesses and use webinars a lot. So hopefully that will give you a really good benchmark to work against as well. Now, quick disclaimer, I'm going to be fast. I think there's no fluff in here. I don't like to have a lot of fluff in my presentation, so I'm going to go through fast. Please don't try and write everything down. I think you're going to have this recording. I can share the slides with you. It's all good. The goal of what I'm trying to accomplish here is to get you thinking about the principle of how to run the webinar, right? How to think about it, not how to go push the buttons and build it. So as I go through, just a quick question. Does the screen look okay, or do you want me to go in presentation mode?
I think it would be better to go presentation. That way we can see more of the real estate.
Perfect. I do have a very wide screen, so sometimes it messes up with the formatting.
Good, yeah.
Hopefully that comes across okay now. Let's get straight into it, right? Because I've only got an hour and there's so much I can share. But for those of you who don't know who I am, which I'm assuming is the majority, I run a direct response marketing agency called Growth Labs, and we work with clients to directly get them a return on their marketing or an ROI on the marketing and grow their businesses really, really quickly. So we get to see, luckily enough, what works and what doesn't firsthand. And some months, depending on, there's campaigns running or if there's, an event happening, we're managing up to $500,000 a month in ad spend for our clients. Typically, that ranges between $200, $250. It can go up to $500,000 a month. So we get some pretty good data behind the scenes. And on top of that, I'm also a coach at a few other of my clients' programs. There's a program called the Doers Way, which I'm a coach in, 500 amazing female entrepreneurs. So I get to see, their campaigns. I've got a fairly good network of entrepreneurs also running a lot of webinars. So I get to hear about some of the numbers behind what they're doing as well. So, some of the clients that we've worked for and actually implemented webinars for. Marissa Peer, well-known, well-renowned therapist, inventor of the RTT, Rapid Transformational Therapy Method, runs an amazing business, multiple 8 figures, and webinars are a big part of what they do to drive leads. The Doers Way I've kind of mentioned before, again, helping female entrepreneurs. Webinars have been a big part of what they've done in the past. Numerologist is, again, a multiple 8-figure business, helping to sell numerology reports, and they use webinars in a very different way. It's not really a webinar per se, but the funnel's very similar. And then we've got some publicly listed companies, or not publicly listed yet, but some bigger companies that explore webinars with us and copy and cold emailing to get people onto demos. So just some of the clients we've worked with, but that's enough about me. Let's get into this idea of webinar. Let's jump right in. So when I think about building a really good webinar funnel, right? 3 steps to building a high converting profitable webinar funnel. I think about 3 things. So if you break it down into the core steps, there are 3 areas that we look at. The first is the planning. So thinking about, why we're running a webinar, what we're going to be talking about. The second step is the building. So getting everything done and actually getting the funnel up and running. And the third step is improving. And this is where the real gold can be found. Now, if you think about all 3 steps, for me, the most important part is actually the planning phase, because if you don't do this properly, and a lot of people that I've seen throw up webinars willy-nilly, they don't plan this out properly, it just doesn't work. And so if we think about this in the context of cooking, for example, this is the stage where we get all of our ingredients prepared. We know what recipe we're following. We know what we're trying to do as end result, and we're getting everything ready so that when the heat is on and we're running the webinar, everything's going to work really, really well, and we're going to produce a really nice meal. So this is, the most important step here, because if you miss ingredients, it's not going to turn out the way you think it will. Now, the normal webinar building process is, this is, something I've come across with the clients I coach and I teach, and also some of the clients that have tried this before they came through and started working with us. But I hear a story about how someone in their field or in the industry is just crushing it with webinars. They get super excited, they get fired up, and they modeled the webinar from somewhere, right? I have a guru or something they found online, or a course or something like that. And they fire up the webinar building software, whatever that is, ClickFunnels, lead pages, whatever it is, and they just throw some traffic at it. And they wonder, after it's all said and done, why it didn't work, why they didn't make money, why the webinar didn't work for them. And then they turn around and do something like this: webinars suck, webinars don't work. So what I look at is, well, how do we reverse that, right? How do we make sure that a webinar is even going to be profitable for your business? And so this comes back to planning, right? Making sure that before we even push a single button, write a single piece of copy, we're going to be profitable in doing a webinar. So again, I'm going to have a lot of questions on here. You don't have to write all of these down. There's more questions we ask. We don't ask all of these all the time, but the principle of it is that I really go deep and think about why a webinar before we even build this, right? So I ask things like, why do we think a webinar is good for us? Like, why are we thinking about running a webinar? I think about, who is the audience? Like, are we running a webinar into an email list I've already built so they know who I am? Are we doing a cold audience webinar where I've got to go out and get people into the webinar itself and use ads or something like that to kind of fill the event? Do my audience like and want to consume webinars is a big question as well. So for example, if I'm going after busy business owners, I might not even want to do a webinar because they just don't have an hour that they can give me, depending on the topic, of course, to go and consume this information, right? How do they want to consume this information? What is the end goal of the webinar? So what is it that you want to get? Do you want phone calls? Do you want sales? What is the one thing that you really want to get off the back of this webinar? And if you're thinking, oh, I want everything, I want leads, I want phone calls, I want sales, that's not the right answer. It's like, what is the one metric you're going to be measuring, right? What is the one end result? I also look at who in my industry or which one of my competitors are using webinars, and which one do I think are using webinars well, right? Not just using them, but why do I think they're using it in a way that I think is going to help my business as well? I also look at, why would someone give me an hour of their time? And time is one of the most precious resources we have. Why would someone give me an hour of the time they could be spending with their kids, watching random YouTube videos, or just watching Netflix? Why would they sacrifice that hour and give it to me to get some kind of value back, right? And these questions, if you think through it properly, it's really going to inform the copy that you have on the webinar itself as well. So ads and also landing page. Have you got any questions so far? So I just wanted to do a bit of a check as
we got one question from Janine. Says, can you use Webinar Ninja for meetings as well? This is a Webinar Ninja thing. Don't worry about it. We'll talk about that. For sure, Janine, I'll answer that question.
Oh, good. Perfect. So to summarize all of this, right, the principle of it is, what are the motives I've got for running this webinar, right? If you can answer that, is it to generate leads? Is it to educate at scale? Like, what are you trying to give back, and what do you want out of it? We've really got to understand this, right? Because depending on your motives, the webinar might not even be the best thing for you. A webinar funnel, I should say, might not even be the best one for you, or it might be very different in terms of how your funnel actually looks. So you've got to really understand that. Now, again, I keep asking more questions to really get down to the point of, should I run this webinar? What should I put in the terms of copy? And one of the things that I always like to ask, and it's a thinking framework based on Charlie Munger, who is Warren Buffett's business partner. So obviously a very intelligent guy. One of the things he teaches that I really like the idea of is inversion thinking. Right. So asking what the opposite questions, or how do we get an opposite result to what we want? So in that regard, I sometimes think, well, can I get the same result here, whether it's cause or sales or whatever it is you're trying to do in your business, can I get the same results without running a webinar, right? And just kind of thinking through that. I also think about what happens after the webinar, because a lot of people go, let's run a webinar. I want to make a whole bunch of sales. And that's the extent of what they think about. But sometimes it takes more than the webinar itself to nurture people, to get them to know, like, and trust you, and then to come through and either talk to you or buy from you. And I also think through, if the worst case scenario happens and no conversions happen off the webinar, am I okay to lose the time and money to test this webinar, to promote the webinar? I've had coaching people come through and go, this is my last shot. If I don't do this, I'm going broke and I want to do a webinar. And I always come back and go, well, why do you think, why are you putting your entire hopes on a webinar? And as much as I love them, it's always an important question to ask. Am I doing this because I'm desperate, or am I doing this because there's a real goal and real end result to this? And if it doesn't happen, am I okay with testing my way to victory? Now, I also think about, well, how can I fill my webinar without ads, right? If I couldn't run Facebook, if my Facebook ad account got shut down, would webinar still make sense for my business? But how do I fill this without ads? And then obviously, how do I promote this webinar with ads, right? If best case scenario, what is the win here? What can I do to fill it? So these are all pre-building, right, questions that we have to ask. And then what I also like to do is when clients come to me and say, look, let's build a webinar, one of my questions I say back is, okay, great. What are your metrics for success? And the most important part of this is the last point here, which is, what is my North Star metric? So North Star metric is kind of like a software or a SaaS term. And what it really means is, what is the one thing or one number that if this happens, everything else is good. I don't have to worry about anything else. We're happy, right? What is my North Star? And then from that, you can work backwards and go, well, how many opt-ins do I need? What's the, how many phone calls do I need? How many sales do I need? And ultimately, how does that align to what my North Star is? Does that all make sense so far?
Yeah, lots of interesting stuff. And just to give you guys an example, like in our business in Webinar Ninja, our North Star metric is all about trials. We know that as soon as somebody signs up for a trial, we have a steady trial conversion rate. We know how many percent will convert. We know exactly what will happen, how long they will stay along, what's the average revenue each person is going to spend. So as soon as they start a trial, it's like our job is pretty much 95% done. So, and it kind of reshifts what we think of when it comes to success or a successful webinar. A lot of people put a lot of pressure on themselves and they think, oh, I need to make sales, I need to make revenue, to make X amount of money. And for us, we're just like, we're doing it because we understand that we need awareness, we need traffic, and because that leads to a trial. And more people are aware of what we do in the software, the more likelihood we'll have more trials this month. So I love the questions you're popping on the slides here.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's such an important point, because a lot of the times people get confused with webinars as, as an entire business thing for them, but it's actually not, because a lot of the time, the way that a webinar is very successful is, as you were saying, getting the awareness, getting the people in, getting them to see what we do. And it's not even like the sales thing that we're concerned about. It's how in software, right? How many trials, if you're a consultant or a coach, it might be how many phone calls can I generate? How many people into my low ticket program? So it does definitely vary, but it always helps to have just one North Star. And you have to know what happens after the webinar to convert the webinar metrics into business metrics.
Love it.
Cool. So in terms of the webinar itself, when you know, for a fact, I need a webinar for my business, I definitely want to do it. Here's all my reasons why. Here's why I think my webinar is going to be awesome. Now let's get into some of the tactical thinking, right? So in terms of stages of a webinar funnel, I look at pre-webinar, during the webinar itself, and then post-webinar. So pre-webinar is getting as many people to opt in and sign up for the webinar as possible. During the webinar, which I'm not going to focus so much about. Omar, you're an absolute expert at this. You do this so well. I think this, you've probably got so much good content on this. I'm just going to kind of skim over this a little bit during the webinar, but it's more about keeping the attention, keeping the engagement, the interest. And then post-webinar is, well, if you've done a good job on the webinar itself, how do you turn the goodwill, how do you turn the interest and turn it into whatever it is, whether it's a trial or a phone call? Do you have to nurture people? That's the third stage that often gets a little bit neglected, but is very important to actually get right. So let's think about, pre-webinar, right? Filling up the hot air balloon, getting ready, getting everything set before we go and do this event. Pre-webinar, I ask these questions to inform the copy and to make sure I've got the right thinking and mindset heading into the webinar. So I ask questions like, why would someone want to join me on this, right? What is the number one question I get asked about? And this is a question that you've got to go deep into, because when people ask me to review the webinar funnels and review the landing pages, what I often find is that they've got like 5 different points that aren't that coherent. They're trying to tackle everything on this one single webinar, where the best webinars I've seen just answers one question. So the one question could be, things like, what is the best way for, take a health example. One I've seen recently is, what is the one diet plan that I should follow if I wanted to lose X% body fat in a certain number of time, right? In terms of business, if I'm running a webinar, my one question could be, do cold emails still work? Do webinars still work? And I'm going to answer that one question, but don't try and go over and above and try and like solve their entire problem set in one webinar, because there's just too much to solve. Second question is, who do I want on this webinar? Be specific about who it is. Again, that's going to come back and really be helpful in your copy. You want to think about, is this a live webinar or an on-demand / replay webinar? Obviously, pretty important in terms of how you can, get people on board, and timing of it, and also nurture sequences. Of something to ask is, how do I get this in front of my people, right? Do I want to use ads? Do I want to promote it to my warm email list? Who are the people that I want to get in front of, and how do I get in front of it? So at least have some kind of plan to do this. And obviously, what is the flow, right? Really map out what you want people to do going into the webinar, and then also going out of the webinar as well. And then knowing what your numbers need to look like. So here's an example of mapping out a flow. So before we build any webinars, what I tend to do is I actually use pen and paper, and I draw out every step of the webinar itself. And then I send it to my team and I say, hey guys, does this make sense? And my team will then go and build this nice looking kind of funnel and map out every step of the way, right? So this, for example, is more of a traditional webinar, where it's like Facebook ads, going into a landing page, going into the webinar itself, into the details. Actually, this isn't quite a traditional webinar funnel, I should say. This is one that we developed for a client based on going through $1 trial, and it had 2 parts of the webinar. So it's a 2 webinar sequence. Omar, I think you kind of teach something like this, where the first one's just value, second one is like demo, and then the third bit is a $1 trial. And this is an online product that they buy, where it's a $1 trial, and then it goes into like a $50 a month membership. So this is, an example of exactly the software that we use to map it out. It's not, don't worry about the actual webinar funnel itself. I'll go deeper into this in a bit, but we just map it out is kind of like the principle.
And just I'm gonna pop right real quick. Keep this visual here, because I know that I think it was Janine who asked the question. I'm interested in hearing the difference between the successful live versus evergreen webinars, considering using evergreen. So Janine, while we have this up on the screen, what I like to recommend, especially if you're running ads or you're inviting a cold audience, meaning even if you're like getting somebody like a partner or somebody you're sponsoring a newsletter, these people have probably never heard of you or maybe know very little about you. What I recommend is sending them to an automated webinar. So like the landing page and the first part of this, the landing page and the webinar, this is already built into Webinar Ninja. We have built-in landing pages, and then you have the automated system. And I like to do this because it's instant gratification. They get an instant access to the recording, a handout, whatever you give them. And it lowers the cost per acquisition, because, I know Will's going to get into this, but if I'm running ads, or if I'm sending somebody to my page, and they don't know me very well, it's going to convert at a higher level, because they're going to get the content right away. And then once they are on the webinar, I then invite them to a live webinar on the actual automated webinar. At the end, I say, hey, if you're interested in what I just taught you and you want to go in deeper, or you want to do it easily, or you want to learn more about my product, this is what it's about. Sign up to my next live webinar, which I personally do every 2 weeks to fill the webinar. And that's the the second part of this right before the trial, where they do the webinar, and that's when I make my offer to Webinar Ninja or any other product I'm selling on the webinar. And in this case, it's the dollar trial. So I just want to kind of give you an example of how you can use both evergreen or on-demand webinars with live webinars in your funnel. Do you agree with that, Will?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, look, with the cost of webinars and the low rate of attendance at the moment, we are leaning more towards, at least as a first point of contact, having an automated webinar. But I've seen both work. That, if you just got to really decide what you want to do in your business, who your clients are, if they're willing to come back at a later date to see the webinar or not. So definitely, it's more of a case by case basis. But if for myself, for my own business, I prefer an automated webinar, just because I know that people are impatient. Not everyone actually comes back or has the right time to go through and watch it. And a lot of people will kind of sign up just to get the replay anyway. So why not just give that to them straight off the bat? Cool. So let's keep moving on. So now that we've got our webinar mapped out, we know what steps are going to be involved. This is the main event, right? So this is where we go through and get them to stick around. We look at what do we need to show them, what teach them, what paradigms do we need to shift for them, how do we generate excitement. You've got to think about how you're going to do the support, especially if there's like technical admin questions. This is more so if it's live, obviously, and also how you're going to deal with questions and comments. Now, I'm going to go through this part pretty quickly. There is this company I know who does an amazing job. I think it's called Webinar Ninja or something.
I just read the slide.
So Omar does such an amazing job at this. I'm sure he teaches this way better than I could. So I'm going to just skim over this pretty quickly. Now, after the event's over, right? After everything's done, let's talk about the cleanup, like the follow-up from the event itself. So post-webinar, we've also got to look at, well, what do we want our attendees to do now, right? What is our sales process? And how do we nurture for people who did certain things? Now, if you think about, this is probably a little bit more applicable to live than recorded, but it can definitely be applicable to recorded webinars too. But there's typically 4 things people can do, right? If they sign up for the webinar, they either attended and they took the call to action, whether it's booking onto the next webinar, booking onto a call, booking onto a trial, for example. That's the first group. Second group is people who came along to the webinar but didn't really take action or didn't take your call to action. The third group is people who attended, but they left early. So, there's something there that either they got busy or just, wasn't the content they expected. We probably want to get some information from them, right? Some feedback from them. And the fourth group are people who just didn't attend the webinar at all, even though they're registered. And again, I want to know why they didn't attend, right? Even though they gave us the details and they were interested. So you've got to plan all this out. And each of these different groups probably has its own nurture sequence. I also want to look at my numbers post-webinar. So, what do our numbers look like from top of the funnel all the way to the webinar itself and conversions? I'm going to give you a really, really rough guide. And please, this is actually really rough. I've got clients who do way less than this and make a bunch of money on the webinars. I've got clients who do way more than this and also make a bunch of money on the webinars. It really is a big range, but I'm going to give you at least some kind of benchmark or measuring stick if you don't have anything like this. So for example, from my ad running to get people to sign up on a webinar, I like to see a 1% click-through on my ads. Again, right, benchmark, it's kind of, if you're not hitting these numbers, cool. As long as you hit your North Star metric, this is all like gravy, right? But 1% is kind of generally what we aim for. We aim for a 25% opt-in rate on the landing page itself. If it's a live webinar and there's a bit of a delay, we're looking at probably 10 to, on the really, really, really top end, probably about 40% if it's a very engaged audience who aren't webinared out. But 10% to 20% is generally the attendance rate that we expect on a live webinar, where they have to wait some time. On the webinar itself, we expect about 5% of them to take action on it, unless there's, unless you've got something in here that keeps them hooked, and you've got a really strong offer or a very low risk offer that can go up to 20%. But again, it can be really varied depending on how you run it. Check back to your North Star, check back to your business in terms of the leads coming through in the sales. If all of that is good, if you're profitable, I wouldn't worry so much about these, but just a bit of a range to kind of give you guidance here.
If you just can go back to that slide, Will, I'm sorry, but I know that most of you guys here are experts, but there might be a couple people here that are not super into marketing. So I just want to clarify a couple of these data points. So the first one, click-through rate, basically means the ad is being displayed somewhere like on Facebook, how many people actually clicked on the ad. So out of 100 people that saw the ad, how many clicked the ad? In this case, the benchmark that Will is sharing is 1%. And then the number of clicks is how many people actually clicked on the ad. And then the opt-in percentage is like how many people that hit the landing page, the registration page of your webinar, actually popped in their name and email just and registered, 25%. And the rest is pretty self-explanatory. But I just wanted to make sure that that was clear.
Yep. Thanks. I do get really geeky and stuck into all this kind of stuff, and I live
We're
in
the weeds,
this,
bro.
So we're in the weeds.
We're
so
dreaming in CTR.
Remember to just pull me out, and yeah, happy to explain all of this. But thanks, Omar. That was a good pickup. Cool. So perfect. So post webinar, again, same thing. We need to know what our numbers look like, right? So post webinar, you should have some more data at your disposal. You should know, well, how many people actually registered and what was the cost. We should know cost per attendee, or how many people actually turn up and what was that cost per attendee. We should know how many people took action and what cost per action or cost per lead actually is. And then if you do any selling or trials or something like that, you should track it back to cost per trial or cost per sale of the campaign in general. And then obviously, depending on how long your sales process is, how many days or months or weeks it takes to sell, you should know generally what your total sales versus your total marketing spend on the webinar, including the ads, including paying someone to put this together for you if that's what you want to do, including the software, what that should look like in terms of overall return on investment. So that's more post-webinar after it's actually happened. Does this all make sense?
All good.
Yep,
all good.
cool. Perfect. So again, coming back to the principle, to do all of this, sometimes what we do is we've got two different formats. One is we've got this map here, and we actually print it out and put numbers on here. And another way to do this is we create a checklist or a flow down metric, and we put the numbers into like a spreadsheet that kind of tells us ultimately where our numbers lie. So that's two ways of measuring it. So I'm going to grab a quick swig of tea. Have we got any questions on the first phase or the planning phase?
Yeah, so we got some questions here. I'm gonna just go one by one. We have three here. Dr. Joel asks, in this time of lower attention spans, do you have any stats on if webinars are still working? I know I still like webinars, but I may not be the norm.
Yep, that's a really good question. I think Omar, you're probably better at answering this question because you do have the stats that you see from people running webinars.
Yes.
I know anecdotally that webinars still definitely work, but the style of webinars has really, really changed.
I would agree with that 100%. So definitely, Dr. Joella, like I hear you're saying, like we live in a TikTok world. A lot of people are just, their attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. But people are still watching 2-hour, 3-hour Marvel movies. People are still, binging 10 episodes of a series in one night. And the reason why is because it's entertaining, it's engaging, and basically, I would say 10 years ago, if you had a pulse and you spoke the English language to your English language crowd, you probably get massive attendance because, it was supply and demand. Not many people were offering great knowledge, but now we have a plethora of knowledge. It's not about the what anymore. It's about the how. It's about how you deliver your information. And this is especially important if you're going to be their coach or their teacher, because they want to know what it's like to be coached or taught by you. So this is why I try as much as possible to teach engagement and try to teach, have a little bit of fun. And the other thing is that what Will talked about, when you have a specific topic, you have the freedom to not feel like you're rushing through things. You have the freedom to just go deep on a topic and give a lot of examples. So what I would say is that it's still a powerful tool, but it's going to require us to do a bit more than we used to, because people, it's just things got competitive. People are going to demand more from us as their provider of information.
Yeah, that's so true. And I remember might have been about 5 or 6 years ago now, where I bought this webinar course, all about webinars, and it was like
Hmm.
$10,000 US, and I paid. It hurt a lot at that time, and the way that they taught the webinar was so sales based. It was just like, as soon as you get in, you hit them with the pain, like overemphasized emotional stuff, like you're going to be on the streets if you don't do, like all that kind of stuff. And like, first of all, it wasn't
Exactly.
my style, so I fumbled through that really badly. Like I'm here to give out. I don't want to like pitch anyone before we even get into the content. That just doesn't make sense. But it's like the whole thing of, people are kind of really don't appreciate that nowadays, just because they've gone through webinars before, especially during COVID and pandemic. Everything went online, right? So people got used to seeing webinars, and they expect value up front and entertainment and things like that, rather than like a massive pitch fest. And it's so easy for someone to be like, this guy's pitched me for 10 minutes. We haven't got into content yet. Let me just jump off now and go do something else.
Hmm.
So I'm seeing that, value building, relationships, entertainment is so much more important. But if you do those things well, if you genuinely give back to your audience and make it fun or make it valuable or make it, very educational for them, people are
Yep.
still sticking around and actually watching big webinars. So
And
I
that's what
might.
I try to. Yeah, I'm sorry, there, Will. I was just gonna say, and that's what I try to emphasize when I say building trust, because it is really an audition. I always think about, as a consumer, like when I read somebody's book or something like that, and it's a great book. I'm like, what else does this person have? What else does this
Mm,
person have to offer? Like, I want to buy everything they have. And that's kind of what webinars do. It gives you the opportunity to audition for your audience. I'm
exactly.
sorry, Will, go ahead.
No, perfect. I was actually just going to say, I might come back to the other two questions in just a
Sure.
bit, because I've got some pretty cool stuff I want to share with
Let's do
everyone,
it.
and we'll definitely come back to the questions as much as we can. So, all right, phase one, we did the planning. This is us preparing the recipe, preparing the ingredients, make sure we've got everything we need to create a really really great meal, really great experience, really great webinar. Right. Second part of that is we've got everything prepared. Let's start cooking. Like, let's start putting this thing together. So, uh, one of the things, as we start cooking, it's like, well, we've got everything prepared, but what are the elements? Like, what kind of fire do we need? How do we cook it? What style of cooking, right? This is where we look at that. And so, again, coming back to the principle of three, I look at the offer, or what we're planning on giving away during the webinar, which we've kind of covered a little bit during the ingredients, looking at the recipe. I then look at the copy and the angles. So the copy across the ads, the landing pages, the emails. Now, copy is my jam. Like, I geek out about copy so much. It's what I pretty much built my business on. And I can talk for days and weeks and probably months and years about copy. So I'm going to give a very quick summary of the copy stuff as well. But what I might do, is I might actually share some extra resources that you can share with everyone here and into the group
Awesome.
as well around copy. So I did just do a presentation for AdWorld on my copy framework that tripled sales. So I can actually give that to you as well, and you can put it into the group in case I want to dive a little bit deeper. But
That is awesome. We'll add it to Ninja Town, guys, so you guys can consume that as well. Thanks so much, Will. That's a huge,
yeah,
huge help.
perfect. Awesome. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we're focusing on the funnels and not so much the copy, but copy is so important. So I just wanted to give, something else that people can refer to. And then there's the actual design itself, how it looks, how it feels. Now, I'm going to put my hand up and say I'm not a great designer. I'm actually terrible at design. I never used to emphasize design when I was building funnels, when I was doing this by myself. So take everything I say about design with a grain of salt. And I'm going to say it's the least important of the three. Just keep it simple. But let's break it down. So offer for me is by far the most important. Like, what information or what entertainment are you offering on the webinar itself, right? What's the value here? Why would someone give up an hour of their lives to come and watch this webinar with us? So obviously, keep it clear, keep it concise, and solve one problem on the webinar, right? Not more than one, not two. Oh, no, you cannot do two or three. No, one problem. Let's solve the one thing on the webinar, and show them how we can help them solving everything else potentially down the line as well. But on the webinar itself, we only focus on one thing. So copy is the second most important part. This is really how you present your offer. So obviously very important across ads, landing pages, and also follow-up. So you've got to think through all of that. Again, I'll share some resources because I want to go into what a funnel looks like rather than the actual copy in this session. And then design. And again, I'm a terrible designer, so I think this is the least important part. As long as you make it clean, easy to navigate. In the testing we've done, I've always found that simple unfancy, straightforward kind of stuff works the best because it highlights the offer, highlights the copy, and just make sure the design doesn't get in the way or make it, too fancy where people kind of click around or they get confused. So I'll make a quick note of this now, and I'll come back and explain more about this. But if any part of this for you isn't your strong suit, right? The offer you've got to think through. That one you cannot get other people to help. You should know your business and your audience best. So you need to come up with the offer. But the copy, the angles, the tech, the design, you don't think that you have to build all this stuff yourself, especially as I go through it and show you 3 actual examples of really high converting webinar funnels. Please don't think you've got to go and actually build these yourself, right? It's super stressful if you can do that. If you do have the option to do it, I do always recommend getting other help, whether it's, virtual assistants in the Philippines, other outsourced people to come through and help you with all of this kind of stuff. Like, don't get stuck on the doing, get stuck on the important stuff, which is the thinking and the strategy.
Yep. And just on a note, I'm in the works. I'm going to try to work with our buddy Carl, who runs automation agency.
Awesome.
So he's going to be able to come and help us out and show you how you can outsource a lot of the tasks that Will just talked about.
We actually use Carl's company now as well on the tech side of things. So we have our own graphics people and stuff like that, but the tech side sometimes gets a little bit confusing and we don't have capacity for a full-time tech person. So we just use Carl. But anyway, we'll come back to that. I'm sure if you can get Carl on, he'll explain what he can do really nicely too.
He's great.
But 3 examples of the funnels I'm going to show you. So what I want to do, and I think this is the part where everyone's like, okay, cool. Like, it makes sense. The planning's all good, but like, show me some funnels, man. Like, show me like an example of stuff that works, right? So I'm going to do better than showing you one. I'm going to show you 3. I'm going to give you numbers behind them, and I'm going to give you some thinking and principles around why these funnels work and what type of businesses they actually work for. So hopefully you guys are ready for that. I'm just going to jump straight in. And this is probably the stuff that people are going to like the most or really start paying attention to. So this is a traditional webinar funnel. This is probably what you've seen or heard about the most. It's kind of, and I'm using Facebook ads, you can be Google ads, LinkedIn ads, TikTok ads, whatever it is. It's just a traffic source, right? But I'm going to use Facebook as an example. You run some Facebook ads, you direct them to an opt-in or a landing page. You say, hey, do you want to give me a detail so I can send you the link for the webinar to watch this webinar about one problem, right? People will say yes or no. If they go no, but they click through to your page and they haven't opted in, you can retarget them via Facebook ads again, which is why it's kind of going back that way. And if people do say yes, more than 25% of people should say yes, I'm actually really interested. They then get a nurture sequence. Now, depending on if you're doing live or a replay webinar, if it's a replay or on-demand webinar, you push them straight across the webinar and just give them the information. If it's live, I always recommend a nurture sequence to improve your show-up rates. So you've really got to sell the idea of you want to turn up to the webinar because here's why the topic we're covering is so important. Here's what we're going to be showing you. Here's some curiosity about information itself to try and get people to attend. Now, on the webinar, off the webinar itself, so after this has happened, you then look at, well, did they attend, right? Who attended, who didn't attend? If they didn't attend, there's a separate nurture sequence that goes out. If they did attend, well, did they take the call to action, right? Did they take me up on my offer of helping them and booking a call, or did they not? So then, what is your final step? And then based on that, you can nurture in different ways. And obviously, every part of this is replaceable. So if you don't want to do a meeting, right? If you don't want to do a phone call, you can easily put a trial in here. And based off that, nurture based on what they actually do in terms of action. Hopefully, that makes sense.
And just on this funnel, guys, just to let you know that all the things that Will's describing here, you can just do right inside of Webinar Ninja. So as you know, you have the landing page, which is the opt-in right here, and then all the email sequences are built inside of Webinar Ninja that you can modify. You can add emails. And then on the webinar, you can send specific emails to those who did attend, not attend, all that kind of stuff. So you could just use one tool and be able to just craft your emails. And what's great is you can save them as default and then change the variables. The variables change automatically with the short tags. So you can just reuse this every time you run a webinar.
I can't emphasize how much time you save by having all of this in a single tool, rather than trying to get someone to do zaps and do all of this and zaps falling over and all this kind of stuff. Like it's fantastic to have it all in one platform. Like you'll save so much time by doing it, by using the platform. So cool. in terms of the numbers, I wanted to share some numbers around as well, because I know I always get asked about this, but again, guys, please don't take this as gospel. Like it's to give you a measuring stick. I've got clients who, they pay double, for example, to get someone onto a webinar. They pay $100 to get someone to a webinar, and they're a multi-8-figure business making a bucket load of money from the webinar itself. So I'm going to share some numbers, but don't think that you have to be tied to it, or that if you don't hit these numbers, everything's failed and you're going to be bankrupt. Like it's just not. It's just a good indication, or just a range for you to work from. But obviously, judge it for yourself, please. So, for example, if we're looking at a traditional webinar funnel, I might get ads coming through. I would expect that, if I've got 100 people looking at my ads, I've got one person clicking. Of the one person clicking through, it's okay. You probably should use some bigger numbers, but of the people clicking through, you'd expect 25% of them, if not more, to actually say, "Yep, I'm interested in your webinar." And based on the cost that we're seeing at the moment, if you're going directly from a cold audience, from an ad to a webinar, it's probably roughly about $20 to $30 for someone to even register for the webinar, right? Not attend, register and say, "Yep, I'm interested." Depending on how good your nurture email sequence is, or if you text them with SMS and things like that, you'll probably see between 10 to 30% attendance on the webinar itself. I've got clients at the moment who are running at about 60 to 80% webinar attendance, but very, very niche specific topic to a very specific audience, tackling a very specific problem. But in general, 10 to 20% is kind of okay for live. You'd like to see a little bit more, but if you're around the 20% range, I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's all about the nurturing after that. And then of the people who do attend the webinar, I'd expect 5 to 10% to take the next action. And, that's kind of the range. It's a little bit conservative, but, I'd rather underplan and overachieve rather than overplan and think, "I'm going to crush it. I'm going to get $2 leads. I'm going to get 50% attendance," and then run it and go, "Well, I've actually lost a lot of money that I wasn't expecting to." So be conservative when you plan this out and have your benchmarks. Now, the next funnel is one that we're doing a lot more of now, and I'm pretty excited about this one. I'll share some preliminary numbers. I typically don't talk about these funnels until we've spent about a good $100,000 or $200,000 on the funnel itself, because until then, like, the numbers can be iffy one way or another. But I wanted to share with you a quick idea, because we are seeing some really promising results from what we call our Hollywood funnel. And so the premise of the funnel is, going back to the idea of, people are kind of zoomed out, right? We've done 3 hard years of Zoom calls, and we really need to get people's attention and interest, and really make sure that we engage with them before and after the webinar to get the best results. So if you think about, what other industries can capture someone's attention for 3 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours, you think Hollywood, right? Like, Marvel movies go for a long time, and people sit glued to their seat. Like, literally, when I was watching Endgame, I had to call my accountant, and I was just like, "I know this is such an important call. I'm not getting off my seat. I need to know how this ends." So if we take the same principle and think about how they do it and model it into like a webinar funnel, in theory, you get pretty good results. That's what we're seeing with some of the numbers. So again, with context, I've probably spent about $20,000 to $35,000 at the moment on these across some of my clients, but we're seeing some really good promising numbers. So how this gets broken down is, again, same traffic source, potentially Facebook, but now we do a short video, right? Webinars are so video based. We start with a trailer video, like how Hollywood does it. If you think the blockbusters, it's like a 2-minute kind of trailer, shows some of the best parts. We kind of have the same thing, right? Let's just get onto a video and answer one huge pressing question, or give like instant value within 2 minutes, 1 to 2 minutes. From our trailer, we make the offer, "Hey, come through and either download this thing, get a lead magnet, or join me for a workshop," whatever it is. At the moment, we're running people to checklists and things like that, just so we can have the details and remarket to them. But you can actually go direct to webinar as well, right? Use a trailer to sell the webinar. So people tend to opt in from here. Again, if they don't opt in, we retarget. If they do opt in, we nurture them if it's a live webinar setting. And then we have, before they even get to the webinar, we have another page which sells the webinar. And obviously, if they've got a checklist they've opted in for, we need to get them to say, "Oh, hey, we've also got a webinar. Do you want to join the webinar from the lead magnet," right? So this is where, if you think about how Hollywood does this is where they go and the movie stars do big promotional tours, right? They go on like talk shows, they go on to, these YouTube channels and they do stuff to promote the upcoming film. That's the same principle here. Let's drop a little bit more value. Let's give them a little bit more of a taster in terms of what they're going to be seeing on the webinar itself to get them to buy into the idea of, hey, I want to go and see the feature-length movie, which is the webinar itself. And then on the webinar, everything is kind of similar to what we do previously, nurturing things like that. But the magic of this is this front bit here, right? Getting someone to not only opt in, but to really, really, really want to see the webinar as well. And so in terms of numbers, we're seeing some really cool numbers across the board. A minimum opt-in rate, this is on the traffic we've run, our opt-in rate is actually closer to 60, 70% rather than 30%, but I wanted to be super conservative here. So let's just say, we've got a 30% opt-in rate. Let's just say it's a $5 to $10 opt-in rather than 20 to 30 because we're giving them like a checklist or something that's easy to consume. We then go and sell the idea of, hey, do you want to join this on this webinar? And we'll probably get a 50% uptake on this. Again, it can be a little bit lower or a lot higher, but let's just say it's a 50% uptake because they just click and say, yes, I've already given you my details. I would love to see this thing. So that takes us to between $10 to $20 for per webinar opt-in. But the difference is, even if we're paying the same for webinar, someone registers the webinar, they're now really, really wanting to do this because they've seen all the trailers, all the interviews, and now they're ready for the feature-length movie, right? So that means our attendance rate actually goes up. So I've got 30% on here, but on average, we're probably seeing about 50% attendance rate because they've already gone through the trailer, gone through the interviews, they know what's going to happen. They've seen your style, they resonated with it. They're probably going to attend, more likely to attend. And then off the back of this, because they've now been nurtured and warmed up, they've got more of an idea of who you are because we've nurtured with emails and, more videos before even the webinar, they're more likely to take action off the back of the webinar as well. So those are the numbers that we're seeing, conservatively across this type of funnel. And it not only decreases our cost per webinar cost per attendee, but it also increases the quality of attendees and the likelihood that they'll take action afterwards. Now, the third funnel I want to share with you is one that I absolutely love. So a big part of the clients we work with are actually corporates, and we do a lot of B2B. And so this funnel itself doesn't use any traffic source in terms of ads. What it is if your clients are worth 10,000 or more to you, this could be a really lucrative funnel to run. And it's outreach emails going to a positive reply to attend your webinar and then following up from the webinar itself. Right? Pretty simple. We've got kind of similar elements to what happens back here. Obviously, it's still got to be a good webinar, but off the back of the webinar, because you've reached out to them and you know who they are and you pre-qualified the leads, nurture actually happens a lot better as well. You know that everyone you nurture from this is someone you want to talk to, and it gets a lot easier to either long-term nurture or go straight onto a meeting with them. And so when we run this campaign and this funnel for clients, we see off a 5 email sequence, for example, we'll get like an 86% open rate across the 5 emails. We'll get, this is actually exact numbers that we ran for a client last month. So 86% open rate, 39% reply rate, mostly positive, saying, yeah, I'd actually love to attend this very specific workshop that went into a certain industry. We saw a 50% webinar attendance. And off the back of the follow-ups, we got a 90% open rate for the follow-up emails and a 40% reply rate and a bunch of phone calls. And this one particular client of mine, if they land a single sale, it's worth probably around $350,000 to $650,000 a year. So you can see, they plugged in was 120 people on the front, and they've got the pipeline filled for a very long time, and they're going to make a lot of money from this funnel. So again, coming back to the idea of, well, we know, there's 3 examples here, but how do we build this out, right? How do we actually build this? Again, coming back to mapping out the flow, number one thing is make sure you know what steps are involved. Create a checklist of what you've got to do each and every single step. And then how do you outsource the rest? Because you should be focusing on your highest point of leverage or highest point of value, which is making sure that you run an amazing webinar, you give an amazing amount of value, you entertain them along the way. And that's what you should be focusing on. So practicing a webinar, right? Getting all the points right, and then try and get other people to take care of the rest, like the tech stuff, for example. So I'm going to skim through this next bit fairly quickly because I know there's probably a few questions here, Omar. So I'm going to get through this next bit, but this next bit is actually still very, very important. And it's about improving ROI. So, we've built the webinar, we've launched it, things have happened, we've cooked our meal, right? We've got the ingredients prepared, we've cooked our meal. Now it's time to reap the rewards, to eat the meal itself. And this is where, so far we've done the planning, built the funnel, launched traffic, done the webinar itself. This is where people are like, okay, cool, let me go smash some whiskeys and chill out. But unfortunately, the work isn't done just yet, right? It's not, we're close, but not quite yet. So now this is where we look at tracking our numbers, right? What is my North Star metric? Did we meet the North Star? If we did, heck yeah, let's scale this. If we didn't, that's when we go back into the numbers that happened beforehand and look at where can we improve our metrics, right? We go back and go, well, where am I falling short? And what can I do? What can I test to improve the results for next time? And again, don't change everything about you. Don't rip out your entire webinar because you didn't hit your North Star. Think about what pieces you can test and go test one at a time. Make sure you really measure everything accurately and test until you hit your North Star. And once you hit your North Star, just triple down on what you've got. Yes, it's good to constantly test, but the point of testing is to find winners. So there's no point testing, and we've got a winner, and then just going and testing some more. Once you find a winner, triple down on it, scale it with all the resources you have. And then when it stops working, then you go back to testing. And again, you can test across multiple traffic sources as well when it comes time to scale. So to quickly summarize, 3 steps to looking at this. Planning is definitely the most important part. It's where you're going to get all the insights in terms of copy, what you need to do, your audience. Building, outsource as much of it as you can. And I've given you 3 examples of funnels which are working really well at the moment to get people onto webinars. And the real goal is when you can test, improve, and do better every single time. And if you want more info on this or I have other questions, I've got my email on here. But let me stop my screen share and come back to you and take questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Will. That's awesome. We got tons of questions here that are really juicy. I can't wait to jump into them. So let me go ahead and they're ranked by number of votes. So Carlos says, which area do webinars work better, B2B or B2C?
I've seen it work really well for both. It just depends. It's not so much like I would ask a better question and go, how do you make a webinar work for your business, rather than does it work, yes or no? Does it work for B2B? Does it work for B2C? Like, how do you make it work for you? And is it the right strategy for you?
I love that. Reframing the question is a great strategy. Matt says, I'm still nervous about automated webinars numbers wise. Do they have higher rate or lower rate of attendance? I'll jump on this one, and then, Will, of course, you can piggyback on whatever you think is useful. Matt, the best way to look at this is you need leads. You need a way to get people that possibly would be a customer for you. And then from there, you're going to nurture that lead. You're going to build a relationship. You're going to build trust. You're going to give them a chance to see what you got and your value. But it all starts with getting leads. So the reason why automated webinars are so powerful, in my experience, is that it allows me to scale lead building very quickly. Because I can't do a webinar every day. So yes, my attendance per webinar, if I look at my automated webinar, it's not going to have as many attendees as live, because live has an intrinsic value because it's live and people are going to get to interact and they get to see the person that they heard about on a live webinar. But with automated webinars, there's no breaks, right? Around the clock when I'm sleeping, it's collecting leads. I can't do a webinar 24/7. So in total, if I look at the month, my automated webinars for sure will collect more leads than one single live webinar or all the live webinars I do in a month. And it's basically like a net that catches all my leads. And then from my automated webinar, I go ahead and I try to get them onto my live webinar. So that's my answer to you. Don't put so much pressure on yourself, like, oh my God, the conversion rates have to be X, Y, Z. No, it's basically a glorified, amazing, sort of like ultra level lead magnet, like, because they're getting so much value in one shot. And that's the way I see it.
Absolutely. So Omar, I might have to, I do have a hard stop at 10, so I'm going to have to love you guys and leave you, but unless we've got time for one last quick question. If
Sure.
there's a
I
quick one that
like
I can.
this one. Let's take Suzanne says to convert sales, do you recommend a personal call versus a pitch at the end of the webinar?
Depends on the value of it. Anything over 1,000, as a general rule of thumb, it's very anecdotal. Marketers use this example all the time. I don't know if any of them have actually really tested it properly, but in general, anecdotally, anything over $1,000 in terms of first sale, I would get onto a phone call. Anything under $1,000, you might be able to do the pitch, but the pitch is like you've got to be so good at pitching to sell on the webinar itself. Like you've got to have it dialed in. So I would even say, unless you've done a whole bunch of sales calls, like if you've done 100 sales calls for your product and your business, go to the phone, right, and get those reps up. Once you've got 100 reps, you know exactly what people are thinking. You know exactly what objections they're going to have. You know exactly how the sales flow typically goes. And then it's so much more easier to come back and try and sell on the webinar. So yeah, that's how I kind of look at it.
Awesome. Thank you, Will. We have two more questions, but I'll answer those. Will's got to go, but we want to give Will a warm thank you. Please pop a thank you for Will in the chat so you can feel the love. Thanks, Will, so much for your time and your amazing expertise. And of course, guys, we're going to pop this recording in Ninja Town so that we can continue to look at those charts and those flows.
Thanks, guys. Awesome to be here. And yeah, hopefully see you guys inside Ninja Town.
Awesome. Thanks, Will.
Bye.
Appreciate it, man. Guys, let me jump into the last couple of questions and then we'll wrap up. Janine says, can you use Webinar Ninja for meetings as well? I currently use Zoom for webinars and meetings. In the meetings, it's important attendees can participate and not in the chat. So Janine, we built Webinar Ninja for webinars, but there are some users that use it for meetings. And just so you know, you would just create a webinar as if it was a meeting, but it's not like a meeting link. And you can invite somebody as a presenter, and just like I did with Will, and Will jumps in and we can talk and things like that. But it's more of a broadcast, and it's not really built for meetings, one to many or few to many. Anytime I want to bring anybody, even during a webinar, anytime I want to bring anybody on to share their camera, I can do so. I can just make them presenter anytime. Even right now, I can make you presenter, and you can jump on your camera and mic if you'd like. The other thing I want to mention is if you want to run like live coaching with many people on camera, like a group coaching, this is something that you might be interested in to use Course Ninja for this, because Course Ninja is our new product that we are going into beta next week with. So if you're interested, go to courseninja.co and make sure you sign up for our beta launch, and so you can get access. A question: can you share some things that you tried that you thought would work and didn't, and some surprising things that did work? Suzanne, that's a great question. Interestingly enough, I share this technique, and this is one of the things that kind of like I was surprised worked so well. But then after I used it, I was like, oh, of course it does. And that's why I teach it so much in our webinars. And that's the automated webinar as a lead magnet, and just making it very short. So I actually literally, the purpose of the automated webinar is to give them some sort of lead magnet, a template, a workbook, a cheat sheet, something like that. And then literally the video portion of the automated webinar is me explaining what that cheat sheet is, right? So I just say, hey, download it. I use the download feature of the handout feature in Webinar Ninja. And I say, hey, just download it right now. Let's walk through it right now. I explain everything that they need to do on this cheat sheet, or like how to implement this guide. It is literally just like a 5-minute webinar. And the reason why I keep it short is so that they consume it right away. And I make this an on-demand webinar so that they just have access to it right away. And then from there, at the end of the webinar, I just say, hey, if this was useful, if you thought this template was great and you want to learn how to take things to the next level, you might be interested in joining me in my next live webinar. And then I have an offer, which is a call to action that shows them, how to get to that live webinar with a link to the live webinar. So that really surprised me how well that converts, because a lot of people think that it has to be like jam-packed with content, but instead I give them a handout and just show them how to use it. And it's just a really powerful way to get leads and get people to my live webinar. One of the things that didn't work was it was interesting because a lot of people, when they start running ads, they run ads and they try as much as possible to lower the cost per acquisition. So they create some sort of ad to lead to something to get the lead and then invite them to the webinar. And often we kind of force this, and it's not congruent with the webinar. So for example, they'll say like, click on this ad and download my top 10 tips when it comes to, how to fill your webinar, right? And they go ahead and do that. And then I invite them to a webinar about like how to sell your course. And then they're like, well, maybe they don't have a course. So like the lead magnet that I used to run the ad is not congruent with the actual webinar I want them to eventually land on. So sometimes we try to save money as much as possible by lowering cost per acquisition, but my recommendation is whatever you're running ads for, make sure it's super congruent with where you want to eventually get them to go. Especially if you're going to be selling a product afterwards. Like it all has to line up. So it's like a continuation, kind of like, step 1, step 2, step 3, same theme, same kind of product, same end result. I hope that makes sense, Suzanne. I hope that helps everybody. Thank you guys so much for being here. And guys, remember, so the short webinar is more of a tease, Carlos says. No, it's actually a lot of value. The best way I would say it's a lead magnet disguised as an automated webinar. So like they're going for the lead magnet, or I should say it's an automated webinar disguised as a lead magnet. So they are going there for the actual lead magnet, and then the actual when they opt in, they get this bonus video and explanation and all that kind of stuff. And it leads them, it gives me a chance to invite them to the webinar. So it's like, it almost becomes like this mini training, very quickly delivers that value. Thank you guys so much. And guys, we'll see you inside in Ninja Town. We'll pop the recording in Ninja Town as well. Thank you so much, guys, for being here. And Will's a member, so he said he's going to be joining us on Ninja Town and answering questions if you have once we post it. Thanks, guys. Have a